Hey everybody, my name is Christian Swenson. I do videos here on YouTube about autism, autistic consciousness, and life on the autism spectrum. Have you heard of ABA? I'll spell it for you. It's ABA. It's pronounced ABBA. Not to be confused with ABBA. ABBA's a lot better than ABA. One more look and I can hear a bell ring. It's very appropriate, like Pavlov. The name Pavlov probably rings a bell. One more look and I forget everything. Yeah, that's ABBA for you, ABA. Applied Behavioral Analysis. It's a controversial therapy, though controversially, not a controversial therapy because it's so widely used for autism. It's a behavioral therapy. It focuses on behaviors, on context, on situations. Those are good things, I guess. But it's based on bad science. It's based on a misunderstanding of what autism is, and it's harmful. I'll get into that. And it's not just because, although it definitely is, because people do shock therapy. No, that's not to say that that's not to say that electroshock therapy isn't always a bad thing. I know someone whose depression is only relieved through electroshock therapy, but that's something else. That's an induced seizure. Shock therapy is awful, right? It's designed to discourage you. If I were ever in ABA, which thank goodness I wasn't, what I would do is I would, when I get shocked, I would say, oh, please do it more. I would say, oh, yeah, I would make it uncomfortable for them, like in that way, right? And then they would stop. But enough silliness, right? Well, the silliness probably won't stop. And then the reason I'm silly is because it's a very serious topic, and it also makes fun of them. So there you go. One more look and I can hear a bell ring. But ABA, right? The whole idea behind it, well, in fact, let's ask the people that promote ABA, Autism Speaks, which funnily enough is actually not asking autistic people or autism what they would say. Kind of like it's neurosplaining, I guess. It's right here, right? So Autism Speaks, Applied Behavioral Analysis, ABA Autism Treatment. Let's ask them what it is. So what does ABA help you understand? Autism Speaks, and this is what they say. It helps you understand how behavior works, how behavior is affected by the environment, and how learning takes place. So let's listen to that really closely here. Listening is a good skill. How behavior works. So like the things that compose the behavior, that's probably a useful thing. How behavior is affected by the environment. That's also useful, right? The environment itself, can affect us in lots of ways. I've talked about that to my classes and probably here before. How learning takes place. Okay, those are all really vague. But also, notice what they didn't include. Is there anything on the inside of the human being, of the autistic human being? Okay, how behavior works. Behavior is something outside, something visible. Remember, we talked about that last time. How behavior is affected by the environment. The environment's also outside, isn't it? How learning takes place. Maybe that's a little bit inside, but it's not what you learn. It's how learning takes place. These are all things that the therapist can look at. Again, you kind of get those splaining vibes, don't you? There's a book. It's a fantastic book, part of a series of books by a psychologist. His name is James Hillman. He's post-Jungian. He's great. He's kind of postmodern, takes Jungian stuff into a postmodern direction. This is a collection of his essays and speeches called Mythic Figures. What he does is he talks about the Greek gods, and he uses the Greek and Roman gods as interpretive tools to help us understand the world and psychology. It's really cool. It's not quite like anything you've probably ever seen. But this is his chapter about Hestia, right? Hestia is the first of the Greek gods, actually. They would offer sacrifices to Hestia before they offered sacrifices to Zeus or anyone else. Because when you offered sacrifices, you do it at the hearth. Hestia was the goddess of the hearth, right? And she was the first person. She was the last person to go into Kronos and the last person to come out of him when he swallowed his kids, I think, something like that. He wrote this essay called In, like the letters I-N, Hestia's preposition, right? So let's see, it's on page 230. I had it open, but then I lost it. Story of my life. So, this is what he says. Before we get to that, a reminder of what we all already know. That's a good way to start things. In is no doubt the soul word. Soul is his word for a specific way of looking at life. In is definitely in-depth psychology. in analysis, in therapy, in the transference, in love, in a relationship, in mourning, in your head, and not in your body, and once upon a time in a family way. Now in has got deeper, gone further, becoming into. The key term for being thoroughly absorbed into bird watching, into rap, into Mexican cooking. Isn't he a great writer? Right? So, and then he continues, right? The history of our field, i.e. psychology, confirms these ordinary uses of in and into. The locus of psychoanalytic preoccupations from its beginning was an interior topography or map making and dynamics of regions, figures, and forces, memories and feelings, flows and complexes, all of which are imagined to be internal. For him, imagination isn't necessarily a bad thing. We are all imagining all the time whenever we think. And then here's the crucial bit. Especially feelings. They are kept in and let out. Keep the feelings in, let them out. They are deep down inside, and they go on continually as the interior reflective coloring and rhythm to outer behavior. A major objection to behaviorism, there we go, and behavior therapy, applied behavior analysis, right, on the part of depth analysts, has been that behaviorism has no inside. There's no in there. So that's basically the relevant part. As we can see in this behaviorist model of the psyche that Autism Speaks has so gladly told us, there is no inside to anybody, really, but especially to autistic people. I mean, and the reason why you can assume there's no inside is because for most people, the inside is the same. We try to not speak too loud. We try to not do the wrong things. We try to not express ourselves too much. And so we can assume that what is visible on the outside is all you get. And autistic people break that rule, and so they're punished. Literally, in this case, by either giving negative feedback, like giving you a shock when you've been behaving badly according to some situation, or the lack of a positive feedback, right? Which is, again, the same idea. And so that's a bit of a problem. I won't say problematic, because problematic's already an old word, and we need to retire it, because it doesn't mean anything anymore. Aside. So ABA, they continue. Okay, well, let's keep hearing autism speaking, shall we? ABA therapy applies our understanding of how behavior works to real life situations. Well, I actually don't know of any situations that aren't real. Interesting. The goal is to increase behaviors that are helpful and decrease behaviors that are harmful and affect learning. Again, rather vague, isn't it? Right? Increase behaviors that are helpful. Well, helpful according to who? According to whom? Well, given the thing we just read, the outside, the focus on the outside, the denial of the inside, my guess is it's not the autistic person who apparently often can't speak and whatever, right? And they decrease behaviors that are harmful. Again, who's defining harmful, right? And to be fair, right, if an autistic person is a wanderer, the cars could be harmful, and that's something we should pay attention to, right? We don't want a heavy rain situation. You know, Jason, no. Or maybe it's Sean, I don't remember. Those are his two kids. And also we want to decrease behaviors that affect learning. Now, another assumption that's being made here is that behaviors are linear. They're quantifiable, right? You can do something more or less. Increase behavior, decrease behavior. It's like, quantity, yes, but what about quality? There's some assumptions being made here. Okay, so, and they continue, speaking. ABA therapy programs can help, A, increase language and communication skills. Okay, that's a good thing, I guess. Improve attention, focus, social skills, memory, and academics. Okay, also good things. Decrease problem behaviors. Less of a good thing, still maybe a good thing sometimes. So these are good goals, mostly. Increase language and communication skills, right? We like that, except when we're forced to speak to our aunt when we don't want to, and it traumatizes us, right? Improve attention. Well, look me in the eye, right? You ever heard about that before, right? Focus, social skills, unless you're pretending to be social, right? But because there's no inside, it doesn't matter if you're pretending, right? And so the methods of behavior analysis have been used and studied for decades. Oh, that's nice. it's an argument to authority and to tradition, really. But you know, tradition isn't always good. It is many times. Many times something has been. I mean, honestly, if you studied it for decades, why has it taken you so long? What's the holdup? Why haven't you just figured it out, right? Well, maybe I'm misrepresenting it, right? Maybe they're refining their understanding, or maybe they're just running into a brick wall. And, you know, to use a behaviorist example, right? Like, we'll try a different thing, right? Put the rat through a different maze. Speaking of rats in the maze, by the way, that's a very behaviorist thing, right? B.F. Skinner, the famous behaviorist, and also a really bad author. He tried to write a novel, and it was not very good. Behaviorists are not good artists, for good reason, because there's no inside. So B.F. Skinner, his whole idea was that the human being can be explained as you put stuff in, you get stuff out, right? Stimulus response. That's the idea. Well, human beings aren't machines. That's the thing, right? It rests on the assumption that the human being can be programmed by their environment, maybe, right? But it rests on the assumption that the human being is just stored stimulus. There's a nice alliteration there. Stored stimulus, and that anything, like the human being is basically a blank slate that you can do whatever you want with, which is a dangerous idea, right? If we're assuming that we can program kids however they want because there's no inside, well, that's a lot of power right there. That's some Order 66 stuff. And so, or 1984 stuff, right? Because that whole idea was we're going to program the society so that they no longer even want to rebel, right? Behaviorist assumptions. Guess what else is behaviorist? I've heard this. I haven't looked into it. Grades in school, right? You get a good grade, good response. You keep doing good things. You get a bad grade, bad response. How well does that work? Not well for everybody, right? And so it says therapists have used ABA to help children with autism, nice little vocabulary there, and related developmental disorders since the 1960s. Well, the other thing about B.F. Skinner, by the way, is that if you're going to study rats in a lab, you're not going to study rats in their environment, right? You're ignoring context whenever you study something in a lab, unfortunately, right? And because part of what science does, at least in this type of science, is you eliminate outside factors and try to isolate a certain aspect of it. Unfortunately, it's hard to predict what factors are relevant because the rat belongs with other rats in a rat context, right? I don't know where rats lived before human beings built cities, but now they live kind of in the places we don't like to look, and that works well for them. Maybe not for us, right? But, you know, they don't work well in a lab, right? So it makes sense that the observations you'd make about rats in a lab are not accurate even to rats. Right? I don't know if that's the case or not, but that makes sense to me. So how does ABA therapy work? I'd like to know. Applied behavioral analysis involves many techniques for understanding, that's good, and changing behavior. It's good to understand behavior. Looking at it, observing it, being mindful of it, maybe that's what they're going to teach us, right? Mindfulness. Maybe that's what ABA is. ABA is a flexible treatment. It can be adapted to meet the needs of each unique person. That's nice. Provided in many different locations, at home, at school, in the community. Okay, so not just in a lab. That's good. Teaches skills that are useful in everyday life. That's good, right? We all need skills. We all need to make money. And can involve one-on-one teaching or group instruction. So that's not a problem. At least that paragraph is not a problem. So let's continue. Positive reinforcement. Positive reinforcement is one of the main strategies used in ABA. Okay, so not necessarily negative reinforcement, though. Remember, positive reinforcement sometimes depends on lacking that positive reinforcement, which is basically a negative reinforcement, right? When a behavior is followed by something that is valued, a reward, a person is more likely to repeat that behavior. So we're associating what you already enjoy with what the society enjoys out of you, right? A person is more likely to repeat that behavior. Over time, this encourages positive behavior change. That sounds nice. There's some hidden danger in it, some major hidden danger. It comes in here. The logic that if you do this, if you repeat this, if you give them valuable, the person is more likely to repeat that behavior. Do you know what's valuable to the autistic child? Is what is valuable to the autistic child at one point always valuable to that child? Is there something unpleasant about things that are pleasant? Of course there are, right? You know, things sometimes we enjoy have negative aspects about them. Too much of a good thing can be a bad thing, right? And you think maybe the ABA person says, oh, well, we know what's a good thing and what's not because it's what works. Well, do you know? Have you been autistic before? Have you asked autistic people? Have you listened to autism speak? Right? What I mean, honestly, right? It's like it assumes that logic here assumes that the autistic child responds to reward like a neurotypical person does, right? That they respond to pleasure like a neurotypical person does, because the framework of behaviorism itself was developed by neurotypical people. Right, and I guess it involved animals too, and you could make that argument like animals aren't neurotypical. Well, that's true, yes, but another thing, by the way, about I'll get back to the other thing, but about behaviorism, it assumes people are machines. You know, Richard Dawkins, famous atheist, said that that all life, all organisms are big lumbering robots. And, you know, I get where he's coming from, right? We don't want to have an intelligent designer for him, I guess, right? But kind of an odd metaphor to use if you want to prove that, right? A big lumbering robot. Robots were made by people. They were intelligently designed, right? Like, if you're going to say that the universe is a machine, you're implying that it has a machine maker. If you really want to be an atheist, don't say the universe is a machine, honestly, right? And so you want to say it's an organism or something like that. People think that somehow saying the universe is alive is more atheist than saying it's machine. It's the other way around, right? You know, because evolution is a thing, right? Things can emerge spontaneously from context and from natural selection, right? That's not a machine because there was no designer, right? But don't get me wrong, I do believe in God, just not in the way most people think. People believe in God. So anyway, first the therapist, so let's go into more detail. The therapist identifies a goal behavior. Okay, so this is, to be clear, not the child's goal. It's the society's goal, the superego goal, right? Each time the person uses the behavior or skill successfully, well, first of all, how do you define successfully, right? Maybe it was a win for them, but it was an invisible win because of the way they acted inside, but you can't see that, so it was counted as a loss, right, for the therapist watching, and guess what? They get punished for it, and because the autistic person can't distinguish between inside and outside, they're discouraged for something they should have been encouraged for, right? That's a bit of a problem, isn't it? Isn't the whole idea of stimulus response, doesn't that depend on understanding the right relationship between self and other that the autistic person doesn't, right? That's a bit of a problem. The reward is meaningful to the individual. That's good, right? So maybe what I said earlier doesn't necessarily apply, right? Praise, a toy or a book, watching a video, so something they seek out, that's valuable, perhaps. And so positive rewards encourage the person to continue using the skill over time. This leads to meaningful behavior change. Now, I don't have a problem with doing that necessarily, right? The only problem would be that you are imposing values on the child that the child, first of all, doesn't understand. Secondly, the child may not share. And you know, thirdly, that the child may not respond to in the way you hope, right? I use behavioral change myself, right, on myself, right? If I want to say, right, use YouTube less, what I'll do is I'll put YouTube in a very obscure place in my phone, right? And so if I look for YouTube, like, oh, harder to look for YouTube, I'll do something else instead, right? I'm changing my environment to help me change my behavior, right? However, unfortunately, that doesn't always work. So basically, I mean, I could read the rest of this. You aren't seeing this document, right? Right? But basically, what I can summarize this and say is that ABA, applied behavioral therapy, not ABBA, right? That's something else, as I mentioned, right? We're not the dancing queen here. We're rats in a lab. But There's a fire within my soul that the therapist is ignoring because they only look at my behavior. Isn't that great? So, but yeah, that's basically, that's in a song, that's what's wrong with ABA, right? Is that you're judging by the outside and you are assuming that what shows is what's inside. But it isn't the case, especially for someone who sees the world as radically different as an autistic person does. It is misinformed, it is based on bad science, it is cruel, and it is a way for adults to think they're helping when they're actually harming things. Or I guess people who aren't autistic. I think of them as adults. That's paging Dr. Freud. So I'll see you again, hopefully later this week, and I'll talk to you later. Take care.